Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 19th of October 2020, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're delighted to be joined by the two Davids. So we have David Scott with us, bringing us Northern Exposure from north of the border. And we've also got our very own David Ellis. Well, we're in interesting times. What more can I say?
The pseudo argument, the claimed argument between Manchester and Westminster continues. So this was being tweeted out today. Boris trying to buy himself out of trouble to the tune of 100 million for Greater Manchester. Boris is going around England handing out millions of our taxes to councils to get them to ramp up lockdowns. All this based on a test that is 93% false positive. Well, there may be some debate about that, the specific percentage, but there's no doubt about the fact that the false positive rate is through the roof. We'll have a look at that in 1 second. But of course, Andy Burnham, as we were pointing out on Friday, absolutely at the heart of the global cities agenda. He is indeed looking for his big buy-off from Boris Bryan in order to do what the government wants. Now, the government is now claiming that they will impose this lockdown on Manchester if Manchester doesn't play ball. But this, of course, is part of the shenanigans over devolution.
I think this is more theatre because, of course, what they're demonstrating here is the growing power of the city mayors. So he's able to show, I'm a mayor, I've got real power. And of course, he's trying to say that he stands up for local people. Meanwhile, the government are going to come in and say, well, actually, we're dictating what people are going to do over COVID.
But let's say welcome to the programme to David Scott, first of all. And David, as these couple of tweets from Dr. Claire Craig are pointing out, there are questions, or at least the justification for the lockdown, the continuing lockdown just isn't there.
Yes, this is the case. The first graph here shows a very eerie trend whereby the deaths per week seem to follow the PCR tests in the 28 days prior. Obviously, 28 days relates to the definition of COVID now. If you die of anything, but you had a positive PCR test within 28 days, you've died of COVID, irrespective of the bus that may have hit you. Dr. Claire Craig goes on further here and analyses the data. And she writes here, you'll notice the shape of the two curves are very similar. We can test this. The chart below demonstrates that since August, 93% of the rise in deaths can be accounted for by the rise in the number of tests done in hospital over the preceding 28 days. And she goes on to say how striking this is. In the field of biology, you very rarely get such close correlations. But that's what we've got here. So it does seem that the case epidemic is in fact an epidemic of PCR testing and little more.
And indeed that is shown quite starkly in the latest graphs from the Office for National Statistics. Number of deaths registered by week, England and Wales, 20th December 2019 to the 2nd of October 2020. This is the latest release because, of course, the ONS is always a little bit behind. Now, there were two things to highlight on this. First of all, the peak around April. Now, of course, they are claiming that those are deaths involving, this is how they're describing it, deaths involving COVID-19. Well, as we have been arguing quite strongly on this programme, they involve COVID-19 to the degree that they were largely created by the lockdown policy in any case. But this is at the end of the graph in October is the key here, because look at the number of deaths that we're talking about. Now, there is no justification for lockdown on the basis of that, is there?
No, there isn't. So it's a complete scam. Very poignant tweet that came into me over the weekend was that a student in, I think it was Warwick University, committed suicide, but this was blasted out as being COVID until the young man's father tweeted out, "This is our son you're talking about," and it was nothing to do with COVID. So it's becoming blatant that this is a government propaganda campaign to ensure lockdown, essentially.
But we don't need to worry because, of course, Wales has joined Northern, or is about to join Northern Ireland in creating a circuit breaker lockdown, so complete lockdown for 2 weeks, possibly 3 weeks. The Welsh government saying, well, hopefully this will, if we do this really hard thing now, it will keep us through till Christmas then. Of course, the behaviour change aspect of this continues to drive forward. This is Lancs Live. Webcams and speakers to be installed in some Lancashire town centres to enforce social distancing. So they're saying sound systems are being installed to provide safety reminders to visitors while creating an improved atmosphere via music. David, Scott, do you reckon that's what will happen?
Oh, well, I mean, this is what is it? Elevator music to soothe us. Yeah, is that what it is? We're going to be soothed. Is that not like McDonald's? McDonald's in very rough areas play classical music in the restaurants because it makes the clientele less likely to get violent. Is that what they're doing?
It reminds me, David, of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in many respects.
Doesn't everything these days?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So this report then goes on to say, I mean, this is come out of Wire Council, and they've submitted a report saying the need to social distance has resulted in some temporary road closures. And is being reviewed weekly with officers and the partners they're working with. Webcams are to be installed within each town centre to provide a visual projection of the town centres in real time to aid social distancing at peak periods. Sound systems are being installed to provide safety reminders to visitors. It is incredible. But David, I think if we go back a few months, Brian introduced this. Or at least something similar from St John's Ambulance, if I remember. But it's worth bringing it up again because Dr. Kevin Corbett has retweeted this out, really making the point that before you start CPR, you really need to put a towel or a piece of clothing over the mouth and nose of the casualty.
Yes, CPR equals suffocation, writes Dr. Corbett, and yeah, he's absolutely right. It's just it's an appalling disregard for human life. All based on this fear of COVID, and remember, most of the people doing the CPR are going to be young and fit, and at no significant risk from anything, whatever COVID turns out to be, or however dangerous it turns out to be to the elderly and infirm. It is quite clearly not a threat to fit young people, and if that fit young person has a chance to save a life, behaving that way seems to be completely without any justification or foundation.
Yeah, I'll just add to this that going back to my military training in the sort of first aid thing, checking that airways were clear was one of the things I still remember. And what are we doing? We're putting a towel over somebody's face. I think we are training. People are being trained like dogs at the moment. People are being trained to carry out despicable acts because they're not to use common sense anymore. If you block somebody's airways and they're already unconscious, you're going to help them take up a worse condition, I think.
Yeah. Now, David, you wanted to highlight this from the General Assembly of the United Nations.
Yes, many thanks to the viewer that sent this in. So this is a written statement by the Planetary Organization for Clean Energy Incorporated. This is a non-governmental organization, and it's got special consultative status at the UN, and it's writing to the UN Human Rights Council. And it's not writing on energy or anything like that. It's writing on a matter of concern, and those are that concern is the vaccine mandates. So they write here about vaccine mandates violate the right to informed consent, and it describes how lockdowns are unprecedented measures that have been introduced, but we're now seeing at least a hypothetical solution being suggested that there should be COVID-19 vaccinations that are compulsory. And they write here, compulsory vaccination violates the right to informed consent, one of the most fundamental ethics in medicine, and a human right recognized under international law, including the United Nations International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights 1966, and the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights of 2005, and the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities 2006. So it goes on and it says that all these acts, all these requirements, all these legal statutes from the UN have to be followed, but that the United Nations and the World Health Organization, who are legally obligated to uphold all of those rights, have been complicit in violating them. For example, it writes the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, praised the Maldives government for passing a law in November 2019 that effectively outlawed the exercise of the right to informed consent by threatening parents with prosecution for non-compliance with public vaccine policy. So on the one hand, they have the requirement to uphold these rights, and on the other hand, that's just one of many examples this paper lists of the UN and the World Health Organization trampling on these rights. The paper goes on, it says, the public is repeatedly assured by public health officials and the media that vaccines are safe and effective, but the absence of randomized placebo-controlled trials comparing long-term health outcomes, including mortality, between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated individuals, that statement is not justifiable. Vaccines do not undergo such trials before licensing, nor are whole vaccine schedules studied for safety. So here they are raising the key concerns over the whole case for vaccine safety and the efficacy of the testing regime, and they conclude that all vaccines carry risks. Compulsory vaccination constitutes a gross violation of the right to informed consent. Governments urgently need to orientate health policies towards protecting rather than violating this human right. And how refreshing it is to see people speaking out in that venue on this matter to protect our rights. And these are arguments that we all have to muster. I think we're all going to need them.
Yeah, I'm just saying this is material that people can push straight back at their MPs and local officials that are trying to put the compulsory vaccination program in place. So encourage you to use this sort of material in questions to your own MP to challenge what's going on.
Okay, let's move on to defence then. And well, here is something that many people may not have heard of. It's the Atlantic Future Forum. It's taking place this week in Portsmouth. Well, look who's chairman of it, our old friend Mark Sedwill. Well, we'll find out a little bit more about him in a little moment. Now, the Atlantic Future Forum seeks, according to the graphic on screen at the moment, to advance the special defence, security, technology and trading relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States of America. So let's have a look and see what they're saying about it. During the forum hosted on the aircraft carrier HMS Queen Elizabeth, which has apparently become a floating conference centre, and via a sophisticated live broadcast and virtual event, AFF20 will address the following themes. Global competition in a disrupted world. Now, this is a theme which the senior British military have been talking about for some time. The idea of global competition, big global powers, and particularly Russia and China they're concerned about here. Building resilience against digital threats, particularly in the cyber domains, and of course Russia and China, the enemy there again. The value of data to power our economies. And then globalization and reshaping the trade agenda, that's going to be discussed this week as well. The next generation of defense, which is mostly going to be artificial intelligence based, it seems, artificial intelligence and the future of warfare. More artificial intelligence here, this time in terms of automation and the future of work. That's going to be discussed at this as well. Defending against pandemics and biological warfare, so not surprising that that's going to be discussed. But of course, biological warfare is the thing which Bill Gates sees as the next big problem coming down the pipe. He's mentioned that on a number of occasions. Security and prosperity and the future of space, and building back better, greener and more resilient economies. And finally, the future of energy in a post-carbon world. And of course, in a post-carbon world means with no human beings in it, because we are the carbon-based life forms on this planet, aren't we? Well, we seem to have a mixture of AI, fourth industrial revolution, and the future of the military. And let's welcome David Ellis to the program. David, what were your initial thoughts on the Atlantic Future Forum the first time you noticed it?
Well, it looks like there's been a bit of a step change, isn't there? We've got, are we coming away from the European Defence Union? That's a question. because it seems here that they're very interested all of a sudden in a strategic partnership to continue or to get better, where it's probably waned over a decade, back with America. But we find our old King Mark Sedwell I has gone from being king of everything in government to chairing this meeting. So perhaps that lets everyone know just how important this is.
Well, indeed. What are your thoughts, Brian?
Well, we got an indication that something very special is going on here by the fact that these people who are not direct democratically elected representatives of the country can simply take over or book a slot on board the aircraft carrier Queen Elizabeth to run an agenda on what's going to happen with our defence policy. I come back to this question, who are these people and who gave them the mandate to act? And then I'll add, I don't think they ever had one.
Well, we're going to have a look at who they are in a second, but this goes well beyond just defence policy, because this is about building a future relationship with the United States. I think David's right to bring up the European Union, the European Defence Union here, as we'll see in a minute. But we'll just have a look at who the people are behind this first. So, of course, we've got Mark Sedwell, most recently the Cabinet Secretary, both to Theresa May and Boris Johnson, head of the civil service at the same time, also National Security Advisor at the same time. Thus, why David was referring to him as King Mark, because he seemed to be pretty much the king of everything within the Cabinet Office. He was previously UK Ambassador to Afghanistan, NATO Senior Civilian Representative in Afghanistan, and he was Permanent Secretary in the Home Office for a time as well. But then on top of that, we've got this gent, Stephen Watson, Director of the Atlantic Future Forum, and he was project lead for AFF 19. I think he still is for 20. He serves as an honorary Commodore in the Royal Navy and helped conceive the Atlantic Future Forum. He is Chief Executive of CTN Group, which is an independent media and communications agency which works with global businesses, governments, and international organizations. Now, this is extremely important because in the next topic that we're going to come on to, we're going to see this fusion of government, business, and NGOs continuing, that theme continuing. This man, Stephen Watson, is also a former journalist and BBC News producer and has been a communications advisor to 10 Downing Street. Then we've got Sheena Dunn here, and she is also a project director at the AFF. She is formerly head of events and client engagement at Pioneer Investments, and prior to that she was project and marketing director for an organization called Informa in the Middle East. Some may have heard of that. And then we've got Chris Wilkins, who is he was 20 years strategic and political communications. He was former director of strategy and chief speechwriter at 10 Downing Street. He's now running a reputation and strategy consultancy, so reputation management. It's all about PR and communications, Brian, and selling a story. So this gives us a clue as to one aspect of what's going on with Britain's future relationship post Brexit, because this is absolutely part of global Britain. Another part of global Britain is this. So here we are, the integrated operating concept. Now this was announced by General Sir Nick Carter at the Policy Exchange a couple of weeks ago. Integrated Operating Concept 2025 sets out a new approach to the utility of armed forces in an era of persistent competition. So there we've got this competition idea and a rapidly evolving character of warfare. It represents the most significant change in UK military thought in several generations. It will lead to a fundamental transformation in the military instrument and the way that it's used. And this is really key, David Ellis, because we've got a number of things there. First of all, we've got this idea of persistent global competition. We've got this idea of rapidly evolving character of warfare. And one of the things that we'll come on to in a second that Nick Carter was really pushing, in fact, he was very much extending the comments that he and others, Mark Cotton-Smith, for example, have made, that we're in a sort of a world of hybrid perpetual warfare, that there is no difference between war and peace anymore, and therefore we've got to have this huge transformation in military thought and huge reorientation of the military. It's on the basis of what? On the basis of something that they're making up for themselves, because I don't see this global competition coming out of Russia and China at the moment?
It's a really good question. I mean, some are framing it in terms of superpower competition. So, that's a two-way street, isn't it? The superpowers are competing in some fashion, or one's competing against another. So I've come at this from sort of, I wanted to get to causation. And that's really where we've been going for quite some time. What is the basis of our government's defence policy? And I'm not talking about what they publish. I'm talking about what really actually is defence policy. The stuff that's most secret, that they're not even, that the Cabinet Office mandarins and the likes of Mark Sedwell, that control all this, are potentially not even going to fully discuss with the ministers, because the ministers are now just invisible. All of this is done from the top of the Cabinet Office and those people. They control the ministers just as they control the MPs. So Dannett really come at this from another perspective of, this global Britain gambit, the controlling of the narrative. And you've just seen a whole host of people there involved with this forum who are basically PR merchants. They want to control a narrative. That's their specialism. So what is that narrative? Well, Dannett said, this global Britain gambit's a load of nonsense, because unless you increase the defence budget, that gambit is just a car bumper sticker. So I agree with that. That's exactly right. Because what we're seeing is a reduction year on year on year and decade on decade since 1980, since the Knott Review. Britain has conducted a disarmament process. Now, Anne Widdecombe highlighted this in the interview I did with her, that the disarmament process started in 1980 and the Soviet Union changed in 1989. We started disarming essentially 9 years before that superpower changed direction. What is the causation of this policy? Because if you look at that graph, it is still going down. And as we've heard from Admiral Lord West, it's going to continue to go down.
So, David, I'm going to suggest a couple of answers to that just before I do. Have you got a thought on?
No, because I think I know where you're going. Where you're going to come in on this.
Yes. Well, look. Let me just bring General Sir Nick Carter on the screen here, so we can get an idea of what he was saying at the policy exchange. He said the nature of war remains constant. It's visceral and violent, and it's always about politics. And he said what is changing is the character of warfare, which is evolving significantly due to the pervasiveness of information and the pace of technological change. And David, as we watched his presentation at that event, the thing that came across very strongly was that he is trying to design a new role for Britain in the world. And one of the things that wasn't clear to me was, is this senior military trying to design a new role for Britain in the world militarily, because basically the removal of the funding for tanks and ships and stuff like this is that's a done deal. Nothing can change that. So they're trying to find a different position, or is it that actually it's the change in the role in the world which is driving everything else? That's not clear just yet, as far as I can see. But let's just have a look at this. What this means. The threat has evolved. They're saying that adversaries don't recognise the rule of law. This is unbelievable position to take, because the British government is probably one of the first governments in the world to abandon the rule of law. Anyway, it goes on to say pervasive information and new technologies have enabled new tools and techniques to undermine our cohesion, whoever R is. Adversaries have studied the Western way of war and modernised their capabilities accordingly. Now, he, in his speech at the Policy Exchange, made a big deal of this. He was saying, that our opponents, authoritarian enemies, and he was particularly talking about Russia and China, because we waged our warfare in the last 30 years in public, with the media basically following everything that the military have done. That Russia and China have watched very carefully how the West wages war, and therefore know how to deal with it. Now, of course, he didn't mention the fact that Russia and China weren't waging any war in that period of time at all, at least not, and nothing anywhere near as significant as the West. But anyway, it goes on. Adversaries proliferate their capabilities to proxies, and he very much was suggesting that the future of warfare is proxy warfare. And the effect of lawfare. And David, of course, lawfare is a topic that you've been trying to highlight and over the last few weeks it was subject of your first David Ellis report, and it's a word that most people don't have any concept of.
No, and it's something that, from perhaps a veteran's point of view, they do, because they understand that they're being prosecuted under this rift in what was going to be, old British law, and then EU law, and then the conflict that between the Geneva Convention on the Rules of Armed Conflict. Now, Petraeus highlighted this, and he said that basically, if it carried on, Britain and America would not be able to fight with each other. So I strongly suspect that's probably where we are now with this Atlantic Future Forum getting a bit of a push. And these comments that are coming in from Carter are quite relevant, because he's really saying that, what are we going to have? What is loosely British military? I mean, it's going to be reduced still further under this facade of a review, if you want to call it that, but it's just a mechanism to reduce it, basically. Lovegrove set out the agenda when he took the job on in 2016-17 that it would be reduced, and that's what's going to happen. So it doesn't matter who the minister is, they're irrelevant. And it doesn't matter who you vote for, that's irrelevant as well. It doesn't matter what kind of democratic or party you think of, that's irrelevant as well, because the agenda's in the boiler room somewhere there in the Cabinet Office. The new role will be without hardware, I strongly suspect, because that's what's being intimated from the senior officers that I'm speaking to, and we'll hear in a minute from Admiral West. And that new role will be doing what? Controlling the narrative or something? I mean, is that really what Carter's talking about?
That is a big part of what Carter is talking about, but let's just continue with this. The central idea of the integrated operating concept is to drive the conditions and tempo of strategic activity rather than responding to the actions of others from a static, home-based posture of contingent response. Now, David Scott, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this particular statement, because this really says to me that whatever form of hybrid warfare we're going to see the British military engaging in the future, we're going to be driving it rather than responding to it. That's not a defensive situation. That's an offensive situation.
It absolutely is. And it also implies that we're part of a larger alliance, we're part of a larger union, because we're not going to be able to provide the hardware and the men to do any of the actual fighting. If we're doing coordination, if we're controlling the narrative, if we're going to be an influencer and sit above the fray and control things, if that's even remotely possible, that who would allow that to happen for very long, unless we actually had skin in the game and resources pushing whatever conflict we happen to get ourselves into. If we're going to be sitting above the fray without the means to defend ourselves, we're going to be part of a union with other nations, and ultimately, at the end of the day, we are going to have to follow the agenda of that wider union, because we do not have the military capability to resist and to strike out on our own, should that be necessary.
I think that's absolutely the case. Based on Carter's speech, that is absolutely the message he was sending out. However, just that last point that you made there, David, he is also sending out the message that Britain sees itself, #Global Britain, Britain sees itself as the driver of the policies. They're not going to be operating under EU Defence Union goals. They are going to be driving the goals. This is at least what he's selling. That's whether other people will buy it or not is another question, but that's what he's selling. So let's continue with this then. But maximising advantage will only be realised through being more integrated within the military instrument, vertically through the levels of war, strategic, operational and tactical, across government and with our allies, and in depth within our societies. So, David Scott, this is fusion doctrine, as we've been talking about for 3 years now. This is fusion doctrine, but on steroids.
Yes, everything is part of the conflict. Does your citizenship do what it's told? Because the ability to get them to obey, to undergo hardships, to follow government diktats, that's a weapon. What do they believe? That's a weapon. Do they believe that the other side are evil? That's a weapon. Is it true what they believe? That doesn't matter. That the weapon doesn't require truth. The weapon just requires belief and obedience. And everything, every part of society, is now militarized in the regard that the state is going to be viewing this as part of the pressure it can bring on the opposition.
Well, it goes on. The old distinction between foreign and domestic defence is increasingly irrelevant. When fake news appears to originate not abroad but at home, it gains credibility and reach, stoking confusion, disagreement, division and doubt in our societies. This has been particularly evident with the significant uptick in disinformation and misinformation during the coronavirus crisis. Home is no longer a secure sanctuary whence we may choose to launch interventions unhindered. Away is no longer a regional horizon, but a global one involving space and the electromagnetic spectrum. And David, what it strikes me as being said here is there is no safety. They don't view home as being friendly anymore. The military is now going to be viewing home as an enemy, just as the entire globe is an enemy. I think that's a pretty strange position to be taking.
On one previous UK column news, we showed a video of the Black Watch coming home to Perth, and rather than having a normal parade, they were doing a fake combat patrol through the streets of Perth, and it was weird. It was strange. The response of the crowd was strange. The whole thing was strange. And I remember David Ellis saying at the time that this is getting those soldiers no longer to see home as a place of safety, simply just another combat zone. It's very worrying. And I was particularly struck by the list of things which are threats, include doubt and disagreement. These are necessary things. This means dissidents. This means people who ask questions, intellectuals. These will all be viewed as enemy combatants under this mindset.
Just before I bring David Ellis back on, Brian, are you thoughts?
Well, I totally agree with what David had just said. The other thing that I have in my mind is that outrageous British Army document which had a matrix on it, and it said that anybody that was a supporter of the UK was effectively to be classified as an extreme right-wing extremist. That document appeared, we know it was genuine, and then it slowly disappeared away. But excuse me, if you take that to its conclusion, if you live in UK and you support UK society and you're a believer in the United Kingdom as a country, you are somehow an enemy of the government. And that's a pretty astonishing situation. And it takes my brain to the next step, that the government is not a body representing the public. It's a foreign body, and we've effectively got this government of occupation, which David Scott has warned us about.
David Ellis, what are your thoughts on Nick Carter's speech and this integrated operating concept? Do you think it's fair to suggest that this is, this is Britain's military potentially heading towards war with ourselves as well as the rest of the planet?
I strongly disagree with what Carter's saying and the direction that it's going. And it's been going in this direction for quite some time, but it's done it softly over a period. We've had a period where those senior officers on and around the not review in 1980 and the Falklands War were very verbal and used to speak out and used to, chirp up in the paper very frequently about defence cuts. Well, I never said. Well, I mean, I was fundamental. That's not what was going on. They were unifying the military, and that's not what we were dealing with. But it was politically pitched as defence cuts, so that the general public would accept it, and it was normalised. But that's what we've got is a decades-old problem. This is a 40-year-old problem, really, and I strongly suspect, because of the tone that they're now using, And I'm going to bring what David Scott and I did some time ago with the Churchill forecast in 1945 that left socialist and communist party policy, if you bring it in, this is what it's going to do. And this is where we are now. This is exactly as that warning forecast. If you start to speak out, then you're wrong. And I think that we want to go to two fundamental data points. We have disarmed, frankly, over 40 years. And Russia and China have rearmed quite rapidly over the last 20 years. So for Carter to say our enemies have observed what we're doing and they've adapted and whatnot, yes, that's exactly what they've done. They've increased hardware and platforms and striking capability and fighting capability. And what has the British government done? It has disarmed the national force to a point now where it couldn't really function as anything like a national force. It would have, if it wanted to do anything physically, like in a shooting war, it would have to do that with other people. But Carter's talking about a non-shooting type of warfare that's perpetual, hybrid, domestic, as well as it being abroad. It's a kind of across all points. I mean, I wonder really, what is at the bottom of all this policy? Is it global communism? What is it that we're dealing with? What is this policy, and who is controlling it? Because it's nothing like a national policy. This is not a mistake. It's not happening just randomly. There's a lot of people in there pushing this. And we've lost the capability with the senior officers to do anything about it. They were effectively, they were divested of their offices. They threw the Admiralty out of the Admiralty Arch under Jock Slater, and were put in an office, and they no longer have any kind of clout that they used to have. If the general public thought that they had clout, they don't. They're like the ministers. The ministers don't have any clout anymore. So there's let's see a symbiance there between what's really going on. But we see a glimmer every now and again with one or two MPs. But bearing in mind, we now know that the Cabinet Office controls their narrative as well.
I'm going to say, David, we've got some very big clues coming onto the table, haven't we? Because we can see that we've got the UN via the World Health Organization that's controlling what happens in this country as a result of COVID. So that's one example of an external global body with control. We've got open talk now of a full reset of economies taking place. We've got talk about a fourth industrial revolution happening on a worldwide scale. We've got Agenda 2030, where the documents are all showing us that what's going to take place is going to take place in different countries, but it's going to be the same policy. One of our viewers has just said what's coming is global fascism, and I don't think they're far off it. We've got people behind the scenes thinking that they're going to control these policies worldwide, and we better add that if you want to do that, if that's your agenda, you're going to need to be able to control the world's money supply to get there.
Well, look, we're rapidly running out of time, so we better get a move on here. David, I understand you've been a very naughty boy.
Well, post the defence report with Admiral Lord West, I posted the YouTube video all over the senior officers' Twitter feeds, all over the government Twitter feeds, everywhere that was talking about defence. I posted it all over the Future Atlantic Forum, and all of the usual suspects, Tobias Elwood, all these people. They all had a copy of the clip with a suitable comment. And then a lovely window of opportunity from Lord Ricketts, former National Security Advisor, who was the first National Security Advisor, and it was Kim Darroch, somebody else, and then said, who was saying that the you're going to put a slide up on it, that now if the trade talks are over, are the security talks. If you pop that slide up,
yeah,
and then I'll talk over it while we're doing it. So I've give him the Lord West clip because it's highly relevant, because he's actually not only is he a Cold War admiral, so that's great because he understands this communist problem and how they used to operate. He's got a really good eye for strategically forecasting stuff, and he's perfectly articulated on that program what is going to happen in the production time lag of these new ships that are not really being ordered. And we've got this hypocrisy of, a shipbuilding czar of Ben Wallace, but he's not really building ships. And in the interim, we're going to see the Royal Navy reduced to around about 8 frigates. That was Lord West's forecast. Now, that's chilling. Now, he said that was it's a national disgrace now. So if we're going even further with it, we're seeing more deplatforming going on. So I gave Lord Ricketts this and said, well, would you like to state what the security factors were that we were discussing with the EU? And then it seems my account has been suspended.
Well, there you are. We can't tolerate dissidents or anybody that dares to criticise the British government. You're going to be closed down. Isn't that what it says?
Well, this is obviously not a conversation you can have. So I've gone straight, obviously, to what the revelation there in Lord Ricketts' tweet is superb, because what he did is he said that there were security conversations going on, defence and security, which of course is something that we've been trying to get them to own up to for quite some time. And there he goes and he hemorrhages this on Twitter. I mean, it's hysterical, isn't it? Joking apart, though, this is just, everybody can see it now. This is blatant. If you go into that area, you'll get your Twitter feed shut off.
Yeah. Well, if we haven't got the equipment, we've got major problems in the military. And this is a Mail story, which a lot of other newspapers are covering. Too drunk to be in charge of nukes. Royal Navy officer on nuclear sub, dubbed HMS Sex and Cocaine, is sent home in disgrace after arriving for a shift drunk and clutching a bag of barbecued chicken. This is HMS Valiant, one of our bombers, nuclear deterrent submarine in America, unloading or loading Trident nuclear missiles. This is the deterrent of the country, or part of it, and this is what's happening on board. And if we go back, lovely picture here of former Defence Secretary Gavin Williams. Pardon?
Gavin Williams' son.
Gavin Williams' son. Have I missed a bit there? I have. I've cut him short. What a shame. This is what was reported about the submarine, that in 2017, 9 crew were tested positive for cocaine. So that's a immensely worrying thing for any military vehicle, but a nuclear submarine and a deterrent submarine as well. 4 officers, including the captain, I'll say alleged because it disappeared into a black hole, alleged to be having affairs with fellow crew men and women. So this was a fairly gay ship, I think. Crew going AWOL by flying home, and 2 sailors quit. Now, don't know whether they were involved in scandals or they saw through it all, but 2 decided they didn't want to serve on board that ship anymore, so they left. And we've now got a weapons engineering officer drunk on duty as they're unloading Trident missiles. So this is pretty exceptional stuff. What did the Ministry of Defence say? We do not comment on matters related to submarine operations. Where an individual's conduct falls short of the high standards we expect, we won't hesitate to take appropriate action. So we are commenting, but actually this is anonymous. So what are they going to do? Promote the person? This, David, we're very tight for time, so I'll just give you 10 seconds on this. We are seeing utter breakdown, not only of equipment within Britain's armed forces, but also the conduct of people in the force. And this is being deliberately engineered, in my opinion.
There's certainly some engineering going on. I would really, at this point, love to have Admiral Roger Lane-Knott's point of view on this, as somebody that run Polaris and handed over to Trident as the flag officer. I suspect what's going on here, that this is part of a propaganda exercise, and somebody doesn't want us to actually have SSNs and SSBNs. I think this is a drive to disarm us even further from having those boats and the industry to produce them. I think this is a double-edged approach, and if they carry on slandering this all like this, then the public perception and the public mood will change. It's something that we need to combat and resist. And challenge thoroughly here, because I don't trust the Daily Mail anyway. So what is and I've asked the question, what to 1 or 2 people this morning, what's really going on here? So Let's try and see through this propaganda mist and what's really going on.
Okay, well, I'm going to put this one in to help us. This is Plymouth Live from yesterday. This was the headline: Royal Navy warships room of satanic rituals permitting devil worshipping far out at sea. So that was listed at 4 o'clock on the 18th of October 2020. But of course, this is not current news. It's just reappeared. And if we go back to the UK column reports in 2014, we were warning that there was an attack on Christianity inside the British Armed Forces. So this was the National Secular Society who said we need to get rid of that nasty Christian dogma so that we can all be equal. And the original article about the Satanism on board the warship goes back to 2004. This was the Telegraph's original headline, The Devil and the Deep Blue Sea. And in the article, they talk about the leading seaman who become a Satanist. And they said that he, Cranmer, was now lobbying the Ministry of Defence to make Satanism a registered religion in the armed forces so that Satanists can join up without fear of marginalisation and the necessity to put up with Christian dogma. So this is policy driven by the MOD. They don't want to comment on it, but the MOD has driven this policy, so we need to know who has been doing it and what has it produced. Well, some pretty horrific stuff, because not only has bullying increased in the armed forces, the style of it has got more and more disgusting. And this was the Plymouth Herald here back in 2015, talking about a serious physical assault as a drunken prank. So we've got the Royal Navy promoting Satanism. We've got a breakdown of discipline and morality. But I'm going to say, what was the point in the in the Plymouth Live putting up this article, which is some 16 years old? I've sent them an email to ask them. I think we can jump on a bit here, actually, Mike, to the adverts.
Okay, so let's move on. If you like what the UK column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community, where there are options to help us out there. Now, a few ads. First of all, the first episode of A Dissident's Guide to the Constitution has been put up on yesterday. In fact, it's had about 1,000 listens so far. David, it was quite an enjoyable program to produce.
It was a lot of fun, and it's had very good feedback thus far.
Absolutely. Now, if we move on, then a new Northern Exposure.
Yes, this is the fourth in the 5-interview series with Samantha Baldwin. This takes us through the long and continuing trauma of family courts and the strange position whereby facts are reversed by one word from a judge, and then the whole state starts treating a loving parent as though they are an abuser, despite them not having any conviction or being charged or questioned or having any evidence against them. The state behaves as though it was a done deal. So it's not a matter of sentence first, trial later. You get the sentence and you never get the trial. So it's a very interesting story from Samantha Baldwin, and the 5th episode will be out next week, and that is stunning. So hope everyone will join for both of those. And a little reminder, because we were quoting him earlier on. This is Dr. Kevin Corbett. His interview on Northern Exposure is getting a lot of attention as well. It's very precise. It's very perceptive as to what the COVID crisis is really all about. So I would encourage people to go and look that one out.
And a quick reminder of AV 11.1 coming up on the 31st of October, 1st of November, and details on the UK column website, but also at alternativeview.co.uk, and you can get tickets there.
And we'll have more on Wednesday.
Yes, absolutely. And well, where does that take us, Brian?
This
takes us to Scotland.
Scotland,
David.
Indeed, and smacking, I believe.
Yes. Now, how do you know when the Scottish government is lying to you?
They're breathing.
That's right. The lips are moving. So this is Dr. Ashley Frawley, who is head of the the campaign against the smacking ban. It's called the Be Reasonable campaign. And she states quite clearly and correctly that the government misled the public over the smacking ban. And because they said it's not about criminalising parents. Well, it is, because parents will be treated as criminals. Now, the next slide here from the Be Reasonable campaign just illustrates how stark this is. 2019, I assure members that our intention is not to criminalise parents. That was Marie Todd in the Scottish Parliament. So the Act goes through, and the first thing that the Scottish Government does, it puts out a notice: if you see someone physically punishing their child, you should call 999 to report a crime in progress. So the very first thing they do is they criminalise parents for smacking. Exactly the reverse of what they said. They are lying to us again. This has not gone down well. It's not gone down unnoticed. But it's even worse than just the lying to the public, because they're lying to the children as well. Children are urged, the Herald reporting here, children are urged to call police over smacking. So there's these creepy leaflets being distributed through the schools now, and the children are being urged to call the police if they're smacked. So obviously the children have no idea of the effect of this, that there'll be an investigation, that they might be taken into care, that their families will be torn apart potentially, and all the harm that can be done. The children have no comprehension of this, but they're in state schools, they're subject to state propaganda, and this is what they're being told. Now, there has been a bit of pushback, and the dear old Scottish Government have quietly edited what they're saying. They haven't really admitted that they've changed it, but they've changed the story. This is the current story. If you see someone physically punishing their child, you can call the police on 101, not 999. That's somehow better. If you think a crime has been committed, think. But you just said it was a crime. Anyway, they've changed it. You can also contact your local council, because sending social services on them, that'll stop them. Or Crime Stoppers, who will pass the information about the crime to the police. So it's a crime now. It's not maybe a crime, it's a crime now. Or, as always been the case, you can call 999 if a child or young person is in immediate danger. So they've backed off a little bit, but only a little bit. We're still going to get the police and social services involved. We're still going to wreck your family life. And we're still going to treat you as a criminal. This is the logo here from the Be Reasonable campaign. The any parent standing in front of a height chart, getting their mug shot taken by Police Scotland. That's what having children in Scotland is going to get for you. And the Daily Mail, the Scottish Mail on Sunday did a large piece on this. The title here, the headline is "Call the Police If Your Parents Smack You." And they're reporting on the creepy leaflets that are going around schools, and they comment that kids have no idea that they may be taken from their families. Now, back to Dr. Frawley of the Be Reasonable campaign. She comments, "As with the hated named person policy, the smacking ban shows that the government has complete contempt for parents. Ministers simply don't trust parents to bring up their own children." This is correct, and let us also remember, what's the worst parent in the world? It is, of course, the state, the home of the worst of abuse, the worst of sexual, physical, and emotional torment that children go through is in state care. But we're not really taking any notice of this. One other thing we just highlight, an old UK column article called Curiouser and Curiouser. This is Newell is his name. He was the man who led the anti-smacking campaign. He led the anti-smacking campaign right up to his conviction for raping a 13-year-old boy. He's a paedophile, and he was pushing forward this campaign that is destroying families. I wonder why a paedophile would want the government to be going into families and breaking them up and taking children into care and making children report and inform on their own parents and destroying the bonds of family trust. Why, gentlemen, would a paedophile be promoting such policies? And why would the Scottish Government be following them?
I think we need to answer your question. The why would they be doing this is because the children who are in care are the sweetie shop for the child abusers. This is quite clear, that to supply children for abusers, they need to take children from their families. That is what is happening in UK, and it's a multi-billion pound industry via a false care system, and also the money that changes hands around the abuse of the children and the videos. So I think we do need to answer that.
Okay, David, following on from Patrick's reports on Friday, what have you got on creepy Joe Biden?
Well, just a little update, because Patrick's report was excellent and very detailed, but the story's been continuing to develop over the weekend. So the Evening Standard here reports all about the laptop and some comments from Trump. They found the laptop. You know what they call that? The laptop from hell. That's the laptop from hell. See what happens with it. A giant trove of emails show Hunter Biden making deals and setting up meetings with his father Joe. So this is what Patrick was commenting on. But the other aspect of this is it's now playing as a major element in the election campaign, because Donald Trump is putting this information out. Donald Trump has a copy of, his team has a copy of the hard drive from this laptop, and Hunter Biden has confirmed that everything's real by sending an email to the shop, the repair shop where he left his laptop long enough for it to become the legal property of the repair shop, and long enough for the repair shop owner to wonder what was on it and then send it to the FBI. He sent an email in to the repair shop asking if he could have his hard drive back. So there's no dispute that it's his laptop and it's his hard drive and it's his information, and Trump is going after it in the sort of accurate and direct way that only Trump can do, and he's describing this as he's describing the Bidens as in fact, Hunter Biden. So the guy's a vacuum cleaner. He follows his father around and takes millions and hundreds of millions and billions out of these other countries. This is so dishonest, I call him the human vacuum cleaner. And he's also saying, well, I got closed down and the New York Post got closed down by big tech. And they're censoring this story. The story's true, the story's sound, and the story's important, because the story goes to the question as to whether Biden, if he wins the election, is going to be the most corrupt president in United States history. And now the big tech are deciding the American people don't get to know this. They don't get to ask these questions. They don't get to know the facts. So he's saying that he's going to go after big tech, Twitter and Facebook, over the story. And there's a tweet here from him: so terrible that Facebook and Twitter took down the story of the smoking gun emails relating to Sleepy Joe Biden and his son Hunter in the New York Post. It's only the beginning for them. There's nothing worse than a corrupt politician. Repeal Section 230. So Facebook and Twitter have now put themselves in the crosshair of the second Trump administration.
Good.
Interesting for the election. I'm sure we're going to be seeing more on that. Well, just to end here, I've been paying attention to our illustrious church leaders, and I was fascinated by this headline: Brexit Anglican leaders issue internal markets bill warning. Now, we could have a discussion about the internal markets bill. That would probably be for you, Mike. I'm more interested that the focus of these Anglican leaders is not on the moral leadership of the country and the spiritual leadership of the country, but they're more interested in what's happening with internal and particularly European politics. Who do we expect to see leading the charge? Well, it's Justin Welby. Anybody can give me guidance on what sort of dress he's wearing here and where he bought it? I'd love to know, because it's very, very fetching. He says the bill is, of course, not just concerned with domestic law. It's currently asked the country's highest lawmaking body to equip a government minister to, shock horror, break international law. Now, this is terrible, and I can imagine that Mr. Welby is very concerned about it. This has enormous moral as well as political and legal consequences.
See, there you go. He's only worried about the moral.
We believe this would create a disastrous precedent. But he doesn't really want to be talking about the Church of England law breaking when it comes to the abuse of children, because, of course, his organisation's just been slated by the ICSA Independent Child Abuse Inquiry. Even though that specialises in covering up abuse, it had to point a finger at the Church of England because its reputation was so appalling. So where's Mr. Welby best at home? Well, here he is with the men and women in black. And this was International Monetary Fund get-together where supposedly they're talking about how the world's obscenely wealthy bankers can become more moral and spiritually upstanding. But they did have a few glasses of champagne as well, which I understand Mr. Welby enjoyed. So there we go, quite amazing. I'll add this in because this was the BBC webpage this morning. At 8:30, there was an invisible BBC headline that the UK economy had shrunk by 20%. The population could see it because it was there on the front page. But where was it? Well, you had to come down here to UK facing unprecedented economic uncertainty. But you had to be quick because by 12 o'clock, that headline had disappeared. But it's quite a headline. The UK economy shrunk by 20%. This is the article the link took you to, and this was the quote: Britain's economy shrank by 20% in the 3 months to June as it battled with the coronavirus pandemic, the biggest fall of any large advanced economy. And that headline was simply not on the BBC front page. So we're in a state-controlled media situation. But here's Andrew Bailey, the big man from the Bank of England. He's warning there's a significant risk of economic growth continuing to be lower than expected. I bet you need 3 degrees to work that out, Mike. Absolutely. Incredible. I expect output at the end of the third quarter to be 10% lower than the end of 2019. And then it goes on, our assessment of negative interest rates from the experience elsewhere is that they probably appear to work better in a more wholesale financial market context and probably better in a nascent economic upturn. David, very quickly, very good thing, these negative interest rates, apparently.
You seem to be wetting yourself there, David.
It's so funny. Right, yeah. Negative interest rates, okay. Negative interest rates, we can't really trust the ordinary man in the street, because if we say to the ordinary man in the street that if you borrow £1 million to buy a house, the interest, you don't pay interest. No, it comes into your bank account as a credit every month. I mean, you just can't afford not to buy £1 million house at that rate. Now, if you say that to the ordinary man in the street, he might go a bit mental and do unwise things. But our friends in the city are wise. And they won't abuse this power. No. They won't take advantage. They'll only do sensible things. So it's wholesale that we want to do, not retail. And dear.
Yeah,
so okay. We'll come back on this.
There was so much stupidity in a really short slide there.
These are the people that Archbishop Welby is in bed with in a figurative way. Look at what the BBC said. The BBC comment was that if interest rates are negative, the Bank of England charges for any deposits it holds on behalf of the banks. That encourages banks to lend money to business rather than deposit it. So the BBC, never mind the economy has shrunk by 20%. The BBC is very happy with everything that's happening. And the other part of this article was this lady, Kristalina Georgieva. She's speaking as IMF Managing Director. In April, officials from the Group of 20, the G20 countries, are the largest and fastest growing economies. But hang on a minute, aren't they all not growing, Mike?
Well, it's negative growth.
Yeah, they're the fastest negative growth growing economies, agreed to suspend debt repayments and interest payments to the world's poorest countries until the end of the year. We're buying some time, but we have to face reality. There are much more decisive actions ahead of us. Doing too little too late is costly to debtors, also costly to creditors. Global debt levels were predicted to reach 100% of gross domestic product in 2021. And this is the team that the head of the Church of England is in bed with in order to improve life for people who can't afford to feed themselves. I better stop, David.
Bailey's other comment, right? Bailey's other comment about negative interest rates is they work better in a nascent economic upturn, right? So what he's saying there is that we might not want to cut the cost of borrowing negative and pay you to borrow money, right? If the economy's tanking. But if we've hit bottom and we're already coming up, that's when we want to make money free, in fact, bribe you to take loans so that we cause a huge economic upswing and have vast amounts of spending. That's what he's saying, because that'll fix things.
Well, absolutely. Now, let's just end, David, on a... well, I don't know what we to say about this particular cartoon from the Telegraph here.
This is perfect. This is our political system, right? So you have the alleged opposition and the alleged government, right, dancing the same waltz together through the graveyard that is Britain, right? And we've got dignity, freedom, employment, children, and facts are all got RIP written on them, and they are in harmony, waltzing amongst the gravestones. I think that is exactly where our political system is just now, to a T.
To a T. We better end there. David, thank you very much for joining us. We just say to our viewers and listeners, particularly echoing back that many of you are saying, thank you, UK Column, for keeping us sane in these times, that what we're watching is the orchestrated breakdown of this country. And what we need to do is be getting into a really in-depth analysis of who the individual people are that are driving this policy. So we've got to drill into this. We're not interested in labels. It's the Tories, or it's Labour, or it's this group, or it's that group. We need the identity of the individuals who are bringing in this policy, because it's those individuals that need to be brought into a court of law. We'll leave it there. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.